Jordan Brown, the boy they accused of murder. An 11-year-old boy accused of murder. Is it true or a fatal mistake? The story of Jordan Brown still haunts us. On the morning of February 20th, 2009, Chris Brown was running late for work. It was a cold day in Wampum, a small town of 600 people in western Pennsylvania. Chris approached his fiancée and kissed her goodbye. Kenzie Hawk, who was in her first month of pregnancy, suddenly woke up and asked her husband to take a day off. She wanted to spend the day at home with him. However, Chris could not leave his work. After promising Kenzie that he would come home early in the evening, Chris got into his car and drove to the factory where he worked. Chris Brown and Kenzie Hawk have known each other since they were teenagers. Their paths diverged later on and each tied the knot with others. Chris had a 10-year-old son, Jordan, from his ex-wife. The boy was born on August 12, 1997. Why the child lived with the father and not the mother is not known for certain. Kenzie had two daughters, 7-year-old Janessa and 4-year-old Adeline. The girl broke free from a difficult relationship with her ex-husband, Adam Harvey. The man was a real tyrant. Therefore, Kenzie went to court where a protection order was issued against Harvey. Kenzie stated to the court that the father of her children threatened her with murder. When Chris and Kenzie started dating again, they were two mature adults. The man took Kenzie and her daughters under his protection, and the girl warmly welcomed his son. Soon, the couple was expecting a baby together. The boy, whom the future parents had already named Christopher, was due to arrive any day. It was Jordan who was most excited about the news of his younger brother. The boy had long dreamed of having a younger brother. In general, according to family friends, the atmosphere in Brown's house was very cozy, family-oriented, and friendly. Let's go back to the morning of February 20th, 2009. Chris left for work and Kenzie went to prepare breakfast for the children. Janessa woke up Jordan and they got dressed and went down to the kitchen. After breakfast, the siblings went to the living room to wait for the bus. Kenzie gave them their backpacks and went to watch TV in her bedroom. At about 8:15, the children left for school on the bus. And it could have been just another day in the family's routine. But there was a catch. At 9 a.m., tree trimmers arrived to work around the family's home. Shortly after, one of the tree trimmers noticed little Adeline in the doorway. The girl was sobbing and crying that her mother was ill and bleeding. The worker immediately dialed 911, requesting an ambulance and police assistance for the homeowner. The first to arrive at the scene were police officers. Corporal Jeffrey Martin, now retired, said he was one of the first to arrive at the scene. According to him, they found Hawk in the bedroom and initially thought she had been injured and was just bleeding from her head. Therefore, they did not touch her or move her to avoid causing any harm. The officers waited for the ambulance to arrive. When the coroner arrived and started taking photos, Martin said they realized that things were really bad. What they had thought was an injury was actually a gunshot wound to the back of the head. By the time the medical team arrived, Hazy and her unborn child were already dead. Everyone was in shock. This was the first murder in Wampum in 25 years. The first thing the police did was call Chris Brown. The man couldn't stand what he heard and collapsed. Brown immediately rushed home, and before he could even spend time with his fiancée and mourn her, the detectives began investigating him for any involvement. In most cases like this, it's the husband or wife who ends up being the wolf in sheep's clothing. So it's not surprising that Chris was the first person they suspected. The man was taken to a police station where he was questioned. Brown's hands were also tested for gunpowder residue, and they were found to be clean. Additionally, his employer confirmed that he was at work at 7:40 a.m. As a result, the heartbroken man was removed from the suspect list. The police then proceeded to the school to interview the children about the events leading up to the murder. The children were questioned. While Janessa didn't notice anything unusual, Jordan informed the detectives that he had seen a black truck parked near their garage that morning. He didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just some workers. The children were then re-questioned to verify their statements. Finally, they were released. At 3:30 a.m. the next morning, Chris Brown was awakened by a loud knock on the door. He opened the door to find police officers standing outside. The officers walked past him and headed upstairs. They went to the room where 3 children were sleeping. When Chris asked what they wanted in his house, especially at night, The officers replied that they had a warrant to arrest Jordan Brown. The officers pulled the boy out of bed and, without allowing him to change his pajamas, they put him in a car and took him away. At the police station where Jordan was taken, Jordan was charged with the murder of Kenzie Hawk. The arrest of a 10-year-old child for murder quickly attracted widespread media attention. And suddenly, Wampum, Pennsylvania, a town of about 600 people, was in the spotlight of millions of people. According to Jordan himself, he didn't understand what was happening. Why was a bunch of strangers dragging him out of bed? Why was he being accused of murdering his stepmother, whom he had considered his mother for the past 6 months? The boy had been crying all night. This is why his face looks swollen and tear-stained in the police station photo. The media attacked the police station, demanding to know why the child was in isolation. And what do they have on him? Then the police made an official statement saying that Jordan's half-sister, when re-interviewed, gave evidence incriminating him. According to Janessa, she saw Jordan holding a shotgun that his father had given him that morning. She also denied that they had left together for the bus. Jordan had been delayed, and it was at that moment that his half-sister heard a gunshot from outside. He later caught up with her at the bus stop, and they both went to school. It was revealed that Kenzie Hawk was killed with this particular weapon, and the police were able to find a 20-gauge shotgun shell in perfect condition near the driveway. Detective McGraw believed that Jordan had dropped the shell on the ground as he was walking to the bus that morning. The motive for the murder was the father's jealousy towards his stepmother, his new sisters, and his unborn child. After the arrest, prosecutor John Bongivengo told reporters that he was confident in his case against Jordan Brown. At the time when the headlines called Jordan America's littlest monster, he was at the age when he still believed in Santa Claus. The boy was in a depressed state and practically did not eat anything. Jordan's father lost his fiancée, unborn boy, and then Jordan. The man was in a state that no one would wish on anyone. On the one hand, he was under pressure from Kenzie's relatives, who believed in the investigation's version. On the other hand, the man defended his child with all his might and supported as much as he could. When Chris contacted the police and asked them to check out another suspect, the investigation took note. This is how they began to investigate Kenzie's ex-husband, Adam Harvey. Chris claimed that Adam was making his fiancée's life difficult. He had repeatedly threatened her because Adam had recently discovered that Adeline was not his biological daughter. The man felt betrayed and wanted to take revenge on his unfaithful ex-wife. Harvey also owned a black truck. However, when the police arrived to inspect the vehicle, they found that it had a 2-week-old layer of snow on it. It was impossible for the man to drive it. Moreover, he claimed that he didn't even know where Kenzie lived. The authorities said they also checked Harvey's hands for gunpowder residue and found nothing. He told the authorities honestly that he and his ex-wife were arguing over child support. She wanted financial support for Adeline, but he refused, as he did not want to support a child he did not father. At the same time, according to the detectives, the man cried a lot. It was clear that he still loved this woman. Adam Harvey was also tested on a polygraph, which confirmed that the man was at his parents' home at the time of the murder, and the parents provided an alibi that this was true. Kenzie's ex-husband was removed from the list of suspects on the same day. Meanwhile, Jordan was still in the juvenile detention center. The boy was waiting for his trial, and the only joy for him was meeting with his father. Chris went to him almost every day. He made a journey of 230 miles one way to give his son fantasy books, so Jordan managed to escape into a fairy tale world, at least for a while, and forget about where he is. Chris Brown lost his job and all his savings because of these trips and paid legal assistance to his son. He couldn't even properly grieve for his fiancée, as he had a goal to help his son. However, the man often asked Jordan if it was true that he didn't kill Kenzie. The man tried to tell his son that if he had done it, he would like to know why. Maybe he wasn't aware of certain events. But Jordan denied everything. He insisted that Kenzie had always been kind to him, and he would never dare to hurt her or her little brother. Kenzie Hawk's family turned their backs on Chris. The mother of the deceased, Debbie Hawk, said, Jordan is a murderer, and I'll say it, and his father has to get up in front of the mirror every morning, look into it, and say, I'm the father of a murderer. It took 3 years for the final court hearing to take place. The 14-year-old Jordan was tried as an adult and was sentenced to life in prison on April 13, 2012. I remember just looking at Jordan and feeling like we had let him down, and I felt so sorry for him at that moment, Jordan's lawyer said. And I remember looking at him and thinking, how can this child have any hope left? During his imprisonment, Jordan taught himself to play the guitar, and according to him, became quite a good basketball player. The boy learned to live in prison. At the same time, his lawyers filed an appeal. However, it took another 3.5 years before the appeal was considered by the Supreme Court of Pennsylvania. This time, the lawyers used everything in their arsenal, so let's explore the arguments they presented to prove Jordan's innocence. 1. Brown's house had a collection of weapons. It was normal to grow up in such an environment. Boys learned to handle firearms from a young age. However, most of the weapons belonged to Chris Brown, the boy's father. The shell casing found on the path cannot be considered evidence, as there were numerous other shells found on the family's property. The father and son often practiced shooting. So why was this particular shell casing significant? There were no traces of crow tie on Jordan's clothes, and his hands were not tested for gunpowder residue. This was a grave mistake. They had tested all the other suspects, too. As for the testimony of little Adeline, initially she was unable to testify because she was in a state of shock. However, when the girl was interviewed by 2020, things became even more confusing. Please note that the girl was only 4 years old at the time of the murder. Here is what she remembers about the morning of February 20, 2009. That day, I woke up to the sound of a gunshot. I didn't know what it was, but I immediately went to my mother's room. As I entered her bedroom, the phone rang. I picked up the phone and was asked to call my mother. I went to wake her up. My mother's face was turned towards me and her eyes were open. I said, "Hey, Mom, wake up." When I saw her, I realized something was wrong. I went outside and told the gardener that my mother needed help. The puzzle didn't fit. According to Adeline, there wasn't much time between the sound of the gunshot and her asking the gardener for help. However, according to the investigation, this period was approximately 45 minutes. The lawyers also questioned the fact that the shot was fired from this particular shotgun. After all, the weapon itself had been removed from the wall in the boy's bedroom. The lawyers stated, Jordan Brown was sitting with his half-sister, Janessa, in the room next to the one where the victim was watching the movie, ran upstairs, grabbed a gun, loaded it with a bullet, went to the bed, put the gun to her head, pulled the trigger, killed her, somehow managed to wipe the blood off the end of the gun, took it upstairs, hung it on the wall, removed the cartridge, and ran downstairs while his sister was supposedly waiting for him at the bus stop, all without leaving a single piece of evidence. It turns out that the entire accusation was based on the words of my half-sister, who was constantly confused in her testimony. In fact, she didn't remember it the first time. In June 2016, the Lawrence County Court, having once again reviewed Brown's case, issued a verdict that Jordan was subject to temporary release from custody, which does not mean that his life sentence will be canceled. And already, in July 2018, the Supreme Court took the side of Jordan Brown, writing that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was unable to prove the guilt of Jordan Brown. The court did not have enough evidence to prosecute in this case. The verdict was canceled. When the media asked Jordan's father how he was feeling, he said, "I'm happy. I finally feel like a big weight has been lifted from my shoulders. It's been a nightmare for 9.5 years." When asked what he would like to say to the police officers who arrested his son, Chris Brown replied, "Shame on you is probably the most polite way to put it. You took away a 10-year-old child's childhood. You essentially ruined his name." Jordan Brown enrolled in college to study computer science. As of 2024, he has already completed his studies. Brown is determined to leave his past behind and prepare for the brighter days of his future. At the same time, the same detectives still consider Jordan guilty, but fortunately for the guy, the prosecution did not appeal to the court. The case of Jordan Brown is closed, and the killer of 26-year-old Kenzie Hawk is still not found. Imagine yourself in the judge's shoes. What would you do? Would you keep him in prison or believe that he is innocent? Write your opinion in the comments.